I'd be glad to.
That'd be great, Facilities Committee. Well, I can pass the gavel down to Governor.
Call the Facilities Committee meeting to order. Mikey, could you call roll for us, please?
Mr. Colson.
Present.
Mr. Beard. Here. Mr. Perez. Here. Mr. Stubbs is not here. Mr. Temple. Here. Dr. Yost. Mr. Edwards, you have the floor.
Thank you very much.
He said he would call in. Mr. Stavros, have you called in? The phone line is open for him to call in.
Governor Edwards invited me to sit in on this,
I was just fixing to mention that.
and I'm here.
Provided that you only speak 1 minute, so you have to time your comments. Well, we would like to welcome Rick Yost to our committee. Rick is not a stranger to the Board of Governors and to many of us, most of us in fact, but I believe this is your first official meeting as a member of the Facilities Committee, so welcome. We have a very aggressive agenda, so I'm going to try to move as fast as possible. The legislature imposed a few additional requests on us this year. Chris, you want to explain those, please?
Yeah. And good afternoon, board members, presidents, and those in the audience. Yeah, two things I wanted to give the board a heads up more than anything else. The legislature first asked the board and the university system to engage in what was entitled a student life facilities survey. And the intention here is to assess what are the needs for student life facilities and identify any barriers or obstacles, statutory or financial, to the construction of those facilities. So what we've done at the board office is work with the facilities offices and the student affairs VPs to first identify the existing inventory of student facilities, housing, facilities such as this, student unions, parking, housing, all those type of things, and what the university foresees constructing over the next 5-year period, and then see what's standing in the way of those possible future development. So we'll have a report coming to the board. My best estimate is November will be a draft, probably a final report in January. The second issue is both the college system and our system were asked to report on energy reduction efforts with the goal of reducing consumption and or costs by 10% in the current year over the 07-08 baseline year. It's not a mandate, it's more of a goal, and in the language, it was one of these implementing type bills, it said, this is more of a strive towards goal. So we've worked together with the college system to develop a common template that is a one-page document that each college or university can complete, report on their usage month by month for the past 3 years, identify any trends. I know this board has heard several times of the great efforts our system has made on reducing energy consumption, both from a green standpoint because it's the right thing to do, but because it also saves dollars. And so we can see quite a bit of reduction. We believe we'll see that when we get these reports, but that is required to be provided to the legislature. That report should be available, I'm aiming for our November board meeting. So those are two important initiatives that aren't on the agenda today, but they're coming forward to the committee.
Any questions? Okay, are there any additions or corrections to the minutes that were in our packet?
Move approval.
All in favor? Motion passes. The first real substantive issue is the revised debt management guidelines. I would first like to ask everyone to make sure it's in your blue folder, a new page 12, which is a slight revision. All of these items, I believe, have been discussed several times by members of this committee. One of the major issues to be resolved here is the functional relation question, which would be A or B, which is in the packet. But Chris, go ahead and give us an update on what is before us today.
Yes, thank you very much, Governor Edwards. Just to give some background on this, the board, Florida Atlantic University came to the board for approval on a housing issue in January, and at that meeting, they disclosed, and it was disclosed, they would use some of the dollars from the housing transaction to help with finance the construction of their football stadium, which was coming forward to the board later, and it's on the agenda later in the agenda. In order to do that, we determined that there needed to be a functional relationship established between that housing facility and the adjacent football stadium. The board asked me to work with the university staff on developing functional relationship criteria that the board could better use in making that decision, which is called for in 101062, which is the statute that governs debt. So I went back and I have worked with the university general counsels, the university CFOs, and others at the university who deal with these things, as well as consult with Ben Watkins, who's here with us today from the Division of Bond Finance. I think we'll get some more on that later. We had a workshop in May where we hashed this issue out, worked on criteria, and also the guidelines were originally adopted by this board in April of 2006, and now we've had 4 years of implementation, plus the statute 101062 was passed after the guidelines were adopted. So there was a need for some technical clarification and other items, and so we took this opportunity to revise the guidelines. There's no intention of changing any of current board policy, but just to provide clarification. And with that spirit, we've worked with the universities, and again with Ben Watkins and his shop, and the document before you is a consensus document. We are going to study further the issue of mortgages, which is the reason we have the replacement page 12. We're just going to keep the current language on mortgages for now while we study that issue a little more. So that we've gone through a very thorough process, I'd say, since our meeting in January, and I feel very good about the document here. The matter with the functional relationships, and I'll cover that and then I'll stop talking, is on page 31 and 33 of the agenda. And what we have here is one version. Each of these functional relationship documents has a more full definition of what are we talking about? What is a functional relationship? What does that mean? And basically we say a functional relationship exists when a nexus is established between the facility and the supporting auxiliary enterprise's revenues. And we have some examples of that. In version A, we actually have some factors that would assist us as staff, assist the board, assist the universities in saying, do you have a proper functional relationship established or not? These are not meant to be exclusive criteria or restrict a university, but more to provide guidance. And of course, this is entirely a guidance document that the board debt guidelines. Version B does not include any factors. It merely includes the definition of what a functional relationship is and provides some examples of what historically we've seen as examples of functional relationship. And we've covered this, I know, in past board meetings, but an example for maybe, I know we have some new members, might be you're building a housing unit and it's an area of campus that doesn't have a dining facility. So you build a dining facility adjacent or as part of that housing so that the students have somewhere to eat. That would be one of the more common functional relationships. So I think that's the background, the process, and where we are today.
Okay, I would like to recognize Ben Watkins. Ben, could you stand? And for those of you who have been around for a long time, we had for many years an employee in the higher education system named Carl Blackwell, who Carl also carried the nickname of Dr. No, and he carried that proudly, I might add. Well, Ben is the state's version of Carl, and that to many people he's Dr. No. But he's Dr. No because that's his job, and it's his job to represent the citizens of this state and to make sure that we stay out of trouble. Ben, would you like to make some comments, any comments at all, or any comments as it relates to these debt management guidelines?
The only thing I'd like to say is really to recognize VPs of Finance and Administration working with the universities. It had been 4 years since we really took a comprehensive look at what the framework should be for authorizing and issuing debt, what the legislature's role was, what the Board of Governors' role is, and what the University Boards of Trustees' role is. And Chris has done a great job administering it, and we've forged a collaborative effort to really try to come to consensus so that we don't have divisive issues and to provide sufficient flexibility for the universities to finance the needed infrastructure for their growth. So I think we've accomplished that. On the functional relationship test, I think we got to the right place, and I'd like to thank David Keon, General Counsel of FAU, for his willingness to work with Chris and our staff in getting to the right resolution on that. In terms of these two proposals, version B is I'm slightly prefer version B to version A because I don't think the factors really add anything substantively and don't really enlighten the exercise in determining when something's functionally related to something else. But that would be the only thing that I would add relative to the issue that's in front of you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I think based on the general comments at our last committee meeting, version B, now that it's in writing, it was not in writing at that time, appeared to be a clear favorite, but is there any discussion? Let's first talk about A or B, if there's any discussion. Okay. Now as to the paragraph, page 12 changes, which basically leaves the mortgage debt considerations to a later date. I don't think there's any concern with that. Everything else we pretty much discussed. Is there a motion to approve the revised debt management?
I'll move the guidelines, Mr. Chair.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We're off to a good start here.
Mr. Chairman, this is Gus Stavros. I've been on the phone since 3:30. I'm sorry I didn't want to cut in, but I am here and I'm listening, and thank you very much.
Gus, welcome.
Mr. Chair, I did want to be clear for the record that I moved the guidelines with version B. I don't think
Yes,
I
I'm
clarified
sorry. That was certainly my intent. Particularly, you were such a fan of version A. I can't believe you. Okay, where are we here? Okay, we've done this. The next thing, I think staff through briefings has advised everyone of why we're not actually going to consider an actual adoption of the PICO list today, because we're still waiting on some things to either happen or not happen. But by the statutory requirements, we are required to adopt a fixed capital outlay budget. So, Chris, would you go over that, please?
Yes, I'd be glad to do that. This starts on page 38 of your package materials. The first item up is the overall PICO budget, and we are adopting, as Tim earlier in the operating budget section said, the PICO allocation is fixed by statutory formula for the state university system. So the figures on page 40 are what's been provided to us by the Department of Education, or our allocation, and that is for the 2011-12 year. For projects, we have a current PICO allocation of $219 million. For the 12-13 year, we have an allocation of $174 million, and we have an allocation of $331 million for the out year, the 13-14 year. That compares to last year's appropriation of $259 million. And I could say overall, this is a fair amount of PICO. Our worst year was by far the 9-10 year, where it dropped to a little over $100 million. Of course, it's nothing like the record years we had where we had $600 or $700 million of PICO. But again, this is just a lump sum. If I may, I'll move to the next item, attachment 2. This lists out the formula PICO allocation. This is $24.8 million for the system. This is also by formula, and this is used for remodeling, renovation, repair of existing facilities, and that's very important to all our institutions. Attachment 3, this is the Cortellis Facilities Enhancement Challenge Grant Program. We have a current request of $86 million. Of course, the universities are allowed to collect donations until the end of December, so I would expect to see that number increase. You can see that the amounts that have been collected have dropped dramatically since the 9-10 year, since there has been no match. We've had very little donations made to this program since 9-10. But we do have $86 million, and this is, of course, a dollar-for-dollar matching program. Were the state to match this, it would free up, we'd have $170 million or so of construction that could immediately go into place. Attachment 4 is our debt service on the capital improvement bonds. Attachment 5, this aligns with Rick's in the Legislative Affairs Committee. We're asking for funding. It has to be officially included in our LBR request in the amount of $30 million. So this has to be approved by the Facilities Committee as a budget request, as opposed to the Legislative Committee approved as a legislative item, a law change. And that is the summary of our legislative budget request. I'd be glad to take any questions.
Yes.
Chris, in attachment 1, where you had actual of 2010-11 of $50 million, and you got about half of that estimated for 11 and 12, what's the big difference there?
You're looking at page
I'm looking
40?
at page 40, yeah.
Oh, the difference there, the 49 million versus the 24 million, if
Yeah.
I understand the question. The difference there, last year, the legislature made a change to the funds that go into the gross receipts tax, which funds PICO. They redirected, I believe, a fraction of a percent, 0.15 seems to be the right number, but it might have been a different amount. They redirected sales tax to gross receipts tax that generated additional capacity in the PICO trust fund for the PICO bonds to be issued. But only 90% of those revenues can be used for bonds. A certain percentage has to be set aside because you can't issue at a one-for-one basis, or Ben would have a heart attack. You have to have more revenues than you actually bond out. That difference is cash. That cash by formula is what goes into this PICO remodeling renovation fund across the K-20 sector. So there was a one-time bump in that cash similar to the increase we found in the PICO projects, which was the line above.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thanks. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Tripp?
with regard to the Challenge Grant Program, I think we ought to refer that to Frank to build up a presentation that we ought to take to the legislature immediately to show them that what has happened since they've decided not to fund it. And now we have proof that they had built a system where they probably get $60–70 million a year coming out of the private sector, and by not funding it, they have literally cut off the spigot. And I think we ought to present that early on and show them that their inaction on this has had a major effect on revenue to the state.
That is true, but I would also point out that the universities have not been as actively pursuing Cortellis grants because of the fact that they know there is a backlog. Governor Duncan?
That's exactly my point, that I think we need to tell them.
And I guess just maybe in light of, I would say, maybe more appropriate to the legislative committee, but because we're discussing it between both, context is here, is I was thinking about it when I stepped outside, the whole issue of the stimulus and the job creation. This is real ready-to-go projects with jobs. Maybe we should translate the job creation impact to our legislative request of funding this, because, we didn't really get the bang for the buck we wanted on stimulus. We're losing that already, but this could be a softening part of that, for that return on investment.
Absolutely. I was at FAU several weeks ago reviewing their project, had a very good conversation with the contractor, and I asked him specifically what he felt the impact. He told me they had approximately 500 employees on site, and that they guesstimated there were another 1,500 people who, through the various suppliers, the people who own the grocery store down the street, the restaurants. So that one project affected the economic conditions of over 2,000 people. And in today's economic condition, that's a lot of people, and there is tremendous economic impact. And this, in talking with him, I don't think he was exaggerating even slightly. I think he was very convinced that these figures were very close to being right.
Yeah,
Chancellor?
Mr. Chair, one of the reasons that I specifically asked staff to prepare this brief historical analysis of this thing was for exactly the purpose that Governor Tripp mentioned, to demonstrate that this has had a significant impact. And it is true that presidents are approaching this differently now, but not based on anything other than their fear that if they get people too far down the path of the Cortellis match and it does not materialize, as it hasn't in the last several years, having been a president, you get a little worried about the considered bait and switch approach to this, even though that's not what you would ever do. And so the enticement that this once provided for presidents and then therefore possible donors has waned over time. It is a program that in its heyday was the runaway best in the country. I don't think there was anything in the United States that matched the genius of the Cortellis match. It was, and it had a pronounced impact on the number of people who wanted to contribute, not only because they wanted to help their local university, but they knew that there would be a dollar-to-dollar match available to double their money and therefore double the scope of the project. It is an issue, however, that has slowed down, as you can see in the historical analysis, as brief as it is. That is not to say that if it didn't begin again, it wouldn't pick right up where it left off. Ultimately, the legislature, and I don't envy them this one, is going to have to determine how they want to move forward with it, or if they want to move forward with it. Because even though the numbers have gone down, you can see that there has been an annual involvement with Cortellis. It hasn't stopped, and therefore the snowball effect continues, and the price tag then total continues to grow, thus exacerbating the problem every year that the legislature has faced with this one. So in demonstration, I think we wanted to be able to show this is where it was, this is where it is, so people would have a much clearer focus on how the not funding it has impacted the size and scope of it.
Okay, any further questions or comments? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the fixed capital outlay budget as stated in the agenda. Been moved by Mr. Temple, seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Gus.
Okay, yeah, I made it clear and loud.
Well, that was, you were our only vote. Thank you. I had asked Chris, if you've been on bank boards, they always have what's in the pipeline, meaning what loans might be coming up in the future. I'd asked him to do a little summary of what we anticipate coming before us as it relates to facilities financing, which is in your packet. I'd like to have Chris keep doing that if you think it's helpful. This does give us an opportunity to look ahead, and if we do have any specific questions well in advance, an opportunity to contact the universities through Chris to get some better answers. So we'll just keep doing that, and we'll move forward. Okay, the next action item is Florida Gulf Coast University Financing Corporation. Chris, you want to go over this request, please?
Sure, I'd be very glad to do it. What you have before you, it starts on page 45. It's a resolution for the issuance of fixed-rate debt by Florida Gulf Coast University Financing Corporation in an amount not to exceed $17 million to finance the purchase of an existing student residence facility, Phase 11, and associated improvements. It's located approximately 1 mile from the main campus of Florida Gulf Coast University. Staff have reviewed the project, staff of the Board of Governors, as well as the Division of Bond Finance, We've reviewed this resolution, all the supporting documentation. Based on the review, it appears the proposed financing is in compliance with Florida statutes and also our debt management guidelines. And therefore, we're recommending adoption of this resolution and the authorization of the proposed financing. And this is the 11th project for Florida Gulf Coast. The unusual feature of this is that it is off-campus housing. It's a mile away from the university. It's an existing student apartment residence. The university believes that this is very attractive, that the cost of this project at $16.1 million is basically, this is in your materials, but it's $69 a gross square foot, which is cheaper than they can construct. They estimate that would be about $169 per GSF. Of course, Gulf Coast will continue to add residence halls on its campus as it still continues to be our newest university. It experiencing the fastest rate of growth. They continue to experience very strong demand, as indicated in the project materials, and that's all I'll have to say for that. I'll be glad to take any questions. I know we have representatives in addition to President Bradshaw here.
Comment? Push the button, make sure the mic's on, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Chris has indicated, this is an exceptional opportunity for Florida Gulf Coast University. Our housing continues to be in demand, and what's very attractive about this particular piece of property is that, frankly, we could not build a 504-bed residence hall, including the property on which these units sit. The property is in foreclosure. We're very familiar with the construction company that built the property in '04, and it was built as student housing. We've already started the programming to make it part of our residence livestock, so it will have the FGCU imprimatur all over it. So we're very pleased to have the opportunity to acquire this piece of property, and as indicated in your materials, that those units will be part of our shuttle service that we provide for some of the other residence halls on campus. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any questions, Dean?
Second.
Okay, well, what we really need is a little bit more complicated. We need a resolution approving the issuance of the fixed rate debt by the Florida Gulf Coast University Financing Corporation in an amount not to exceed $17 million for the purpose of financing the purchase of an existing student resident facility, Phase 11, and associated improvements located approximately 1 mile from the main campus of Florida Gulf Coast University. Been moved by Governor Colson, seconded by somebody.
That is what I believe that's what I seconded, Charlie.
Okay, that's exactly what I thought, Tico. That's Phase B, not Phase A. So.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Gus. Are there any opposition? If not, the motion's unanimously approved. Okay, we now move to the next item, which is a request from the University of South Florida Financing Corporation. Here there have been some questions raised, so what I would like to do so that we can maybe shorten the process a bit, I'd like for Chris to go over it and do his comments, and then I would like, we have asked specifically, we've advised USF of some concerns, and hopefully they can address those and save us a little bit of time. But if not, certainly we're going to have the chance for questioning. So Chris, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Governor Edwards. Well then, to be brief, I will not read the resolution. I will just cover some of the background.
You can read it and save me the trouble. I'll just say the one you read.
USF is looking to the proposal is to construct a medical conference facility. It's to be known as the Center for Advanced Medical Learning and Simulation, or CAMLS. The concept is to locate this in the Central Business District of Tampa. This will be in downtown Tampa, near Tampa General. They've been have had several public meetings with the city of Tampa, and have sought where is the best possible site to locate this medical facility, and they've identified a site in downtown Tampa that they have I guess like an option to buy it for $3 million, subject to approval, of course, of this board before they actually make the purchase. The project is going to be approximately 60,000 square feet. It's going to include lecture halls, auditoria, a robotics lab, a simulation center, a surgical skills lab, prototype development labs, and office space. USF has an entity that's currently in the business of providing medical education. This is continued medical education for doctors and other health professions. And they don't have a dedicated facility, however, right now. They conduct this training all over the state and all over the country. And this is the typical type of thing you might see where the training is conducted on new surgical techniques or possibly new medical equipment. And there's a push at the national level for this training to be offered by accredited medical schools as opposed to other entities that maybe specialize in this training, particularly having this training, say, at resort-type destinations. USF believes this is a great opportunity. Their USF Health very much supports this concept, and basically the debt will be secured by the gross revenues of the Health Professions Conference and Corporation, and it will be leased. The property will be built by the USF Finance Corporation. The Conference and Corporation will lease the property from USF Finance Corp. So USF is behind the project. It's just the vehicle here is specifically, it's relying for this loan, which they already have the commitment for the loan, on these specified revenues. What we point out in the analysis is that although this entity has been in existence for some years and has had some revenues, it currently, just under its current business, it cannot support the debt service on this project. To support the debt service, it has to grow. They've done market studies, they've looked at this, they believe they can achieve these revenues. But I don't have the expertise to say this is the case. It's not like housing where I can look at a chart of waiting list and say, yep, this is the residents times the number of students, there's the revenue. It's more uncertain than that. And that's, these comments are joint comments from Bond Finance and myself. So it is in conformity with the guidelines. It is all duly legal and proper. It's just a different transaction. We haven't, as a system, built something like this before. So that's my summary of the project. And I'd be glad to take questions. And as you said, Governor Edwards, USF has several officials here to speak to it as well.
Okay, let's let them come up. While they're coming up to respond to some of these, specifically as it relates to the ability to repay this, on page 3, 4, and 5, which are page 64, 65, and 66 of the board material, some of the quotes that had me as well as other members concerned, on page 64, HPCC may need to reduce operating expenses or request the university to subsidize its operation from some other source of monies. Over on page 65, HPCC's historical operating income is not sufficient to support payment of debt service, and therefore the financial success of the project is dependent on meeting the projected operating results. HPCC will have to realize significant increases in revenues. Then on page 66, HPCC's historical operating income is not sufficient to support debt service on the debt, and the financial success of the project is depending on the operating experience and knowledge of the market. Now, these are the things that historically, if you recall, Florida was always a pay-as-you-go state. We finally were allowed to get into the bonding business through housing, and fortunately it has expanded into other areas. We have had, however, some failures, one being on the USF campus with the Eye Center a number of years ago, which created a big black eye for USF, for the system, and definitely a black eye for Barnett Bank at the time. So one of the questions that I have specifically asked the university personnel to respond to is what additional sources of revenue might be available, and also to relate how this particular project fits into the mission of the university and the academic aspects of it. So that's the specific questions that I ask that respond to. Other members might have questions after they're finished. So please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Let me address the strategic questions first, and that is the purpose of the proposed building and its alignment with not just the University of South Florida strategic plan, but also with New Florida. Let me start with the University of South Florida strategic plan. This project has been carefully scrutinized by a board of trustees. They have determined that this aligns very, very well with the strategic mission and vision of the University of South Florida. As far as education is concerned, there are really two elements, and Chris earlier referenced the continuing medical education component, which is a burgeoning industry, and as he rightly pointed out, the shift in recent years has been to aligning that sector with accredited colleges of medicine in academic institutions. So much of the growth that we've witnessed in that area over the past few years has been the product of that realignment. This facility will also play a significant role in both undergraduate and graduate medical education. The current site is very, very close to our primary teaching hospital, Tampa General Hospital, where many of our physicians and clinical faculty are currently located, and many of our students and residents are training, if you will. In addition to medical education, of course, or aligned with medical education, we see this facility as playing a very, very important role in the continuing education of our nursing students and our pharmacy students as those programs develop. There is an important research component as well. We have contracts with several medical technology companies, Stryker, Intuitive, for example, that expect to work closely with our faculty, our physicians, our medical researchers, and also our biomedical engineering researchers to test and develop new devices associated with, if you will, virtual and simulation training in the healthcare field. So in terms of alignment with the university strategic plan and vision for the future, we're all very, very comfortable with that.
Okay, are there any specific questions as it relates to the mission or the long-range plan? Okay, I think you've answered that very well.
I do want to comment briefly, if I may, on alignment with New Florida, because it's in large part the reason why the city of Tampa, the mayor and the city council have been so supportive of this project from the outset. The prospect of driving new business, new high-skilled, high-paid jobs, and economic growth into the city, increasing demand for hotel beds as physicians travel in from around the country and around the world for this training. We think aligns very, very nicely and perhaps is as good an example of supporting New Florida on the part of the state university system as one might be able to find at this moment in time. With regard to the debt coverage question, and I'm going to invite our university treasurer, Fel Stubbs, to come forward in a moment. Let me just offer a few comments that I think, as you see in your packet, the growth in business of the HPCC over the past few years has been significant, although we've started to see it stabilize in recent years, in large part because we're limited by available space and available technology. Certainly, USF's HPCC wants to garner a greater share of the national and international market in continuing medical education. And we're absolutely convinced that the only way we can do that to this moment in time is to invest in a state-of-the-art facility. We're confident that with the annual debt payment from 11-12 onward, amounting to about $1.7 million, that we will indeed be able to cover that with ease. However, if something untoward were to happen, we've identified our practice plan as a backstop, if you will, to cover that payment in any given year. That's a $150 million operation that we're confident would adequately cover, either in the short term or on a longer basis, that debt obligation. Phil, if you would like to add anything?
Provost Wilcox has done a very good job speaking to the strategic alignment of this project. This project has been marshaled by the university trustees for 4 to 5 years very closely. They have a very solid business plan that's been written. It's been validated by an international consulting group. They've talked to all of the associations, the sponsoring organizations, the medical device manufacturers. There's a great support for this kind of programming. The leadership for HPCC is provided by Dr. Deborah Sutherland. She's nationally known. She understands, and the university understands, and USF Health understands, that the direction for continuing physician medical education is absolutely in this direction. This will be probably one of 4 of these distinct facilities in the United States, and we would like to be one of those. If I can answer any specific questions, certainly do so.
Governor Beard?
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to say a few things and hit a couple of critical items. First of all, this project really started under my tutelage as chairman at USF 5 years ago, so it's been in the works for a long time, and we know it pretty intimately. We tried to build it on campus at first, but the critical element for this building is that it be next to hotels. And we don't have any hotels on the campus that'll be able to serve the people that come in from around the country. So we decided ultimately to put it downtown, and that's why the downtown location is so important to it, because these doctors come to town, they go stay in a hotel, they want to walk to the facility. The estimates are that there'll be about 10,000 room nights generated in Tampa, Florida, which will generate lots and lots of jobs and create people. All those people would be all over the country and not in Florida. Secondly, I've got to point out it is a successful business. It's been in place for years. 50% of the revenues that are projected are coming from the business model, and the other 50% plus or minus are coming from the building itself by renting the building. Right now we rent hotels and stuff, so this is revenue that'll come to us. So you're right when you say that it's not proven, but we don't have a building to prove it with until we have the building. So it's, I don't think, as risky as it appears on the surface. I think that those fees are being paid other places, they'll be paid here. It is a job creator, I mentioned. I think it's financially sound. The commitments are in place for the loans. The training in Florida is better than in Memphis or wherever else it might be, and it's time critical, and it's been studied up and down.
We have a motion.
I'd love to make a motion.
I found, by the way, that the resolution is in the file, so the motion should simply be to approve the resolution. We have, oh, Governor Beard, you moved?
I move, yes.
Okay, being seconded. Okay, now I'm with questions. John?
Who's the lender on this? Who's underwriting this?
The Financing Corporation has a commitment to purchase in a direct placement 100% of these bonds from BB&T Bank.
Okay, and has you mentioned that there's been some independent studies. I don't know how independent they are, but there's an international study, a market study. Chris, has the staff reviewed those as part of your due diligence?
We reviewed the business plan that USF prepared. We don't have a copy of the international study, I don't believe.
Or any other market studies or any of the other feasibility studies you've had on this?
No, I haven't seen that. That's part of, that was included in their business plan, so I don't want to give the wrong impression. That was in their business plan. What they did, they went to the level of saying, they identified I think 800 courses the HPCC is currently offering, the courses that they're currently offering that could be conducted at the new facility, and then they, course by course, talking as to the faculty, identified what specific courses could be offered. And I think that is why they say, well, it's time sensitive, because they're planning for this to open in the winter of next year, of 2012, and that's like the peak of the conference season. But I haven't seen anything beyond what the university's provided to answer answer to your question.
Yeah, I mean, I just have to say, Mr. Chairman, I feel a lot more comfortable if at least our staff had reviewed the whole package. I mean, in that sense, just as a comment.
Any other questions, comments? All in favor of the motion to approve, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Gus. Motion passes. Okay, well done, John. To your specific comment, I was exactly where I know several other members of this committee were coming from. As Chris did point out in my discussions with him, this is new. We've never seen anything like this before. It's kind of a test, but I think the fallback position that was helped convince me is the practice plan. There is a secondary source of repayment here now, which was not really clearly identified prior to today. Well, Chris is personally guaranteeing the debt as well as Dick did. Okay.
I love those guarantees.
At this point, I would like to ask Chris to not again, but to review the revised proposal from FAU.
Thank you very much, Governor Edwards. And for the record, I will state the university had submitted a proposal back, I believe, in April. It was reviewed by staff, board staff, as well as division staff, and the university has been mentioned earlier, has been very good about taking the proposal back and reworking it, and I think the resultant proposal they resubmitted their proposal in July. So this is the first time it's officially being put before the board for a vote, but we have been working on this for months and months. And this is a resolution approving the issuance of debt by FAU Finance Corps in an amount not to exceed $44.5 million to finance a portion of the construction of a football stadium and the associated improvements on the main campus of Florida Atlantic University, and provided for capitalized interest and funding a debt service reserve. And I would just like to point out, this is a football stadium, so I think everybody's very familiar with the basic concept here. It's going to be a 30,000-seat football stadium. FAU currently does not have a football stadium on campus. It has to play its home games, I believe, 25 miles away or so, in basically a county or municipal stadium that's not really suitable for the level of football that FAU would like to be playing. I'll point out some different features here of this proposal. First is on page 78. When the housing bonds were approved by this board in January, the university disclosed they were taking $12 million of those housing revenues and planned to commit it towards infrastructure of the project. The sense for the board, they asked, one, that the FAU would put that money basically in escrow and try to reduce the amount of funding going from those housing bond proceeds into the stadium. And two, to limit that to only those common elements. And Michelle, if you get a chance, could we pull up the, do I need to do that? No, I have to pull up I have a slide. I have never seen anything like this. I might need some technical assistance here. Is there a mouse? Oh, thank you, Tim. Oh, thank goodness.
Looks like we're going to have to postpone it to next meeting till we get it to work. Oh, it's working now.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Anyway, here's the housing that was approved in January, and this is the project that Governor Edwards says right now is directly employing about 500 employees, and I've been there as well, and it seems like twice as many. It's like an ant nest, and here's where the stadium is going to be, and what's in between, and some of it you can see from this map, and some you can't see, is the infrastructure elements. That's identified on page 78. It's electrical, 417,000 of electrical, 425 of water and sewer, 397 of roadways, and all this, like I've put these dots on here, this is all new roads. Everything over here, this is the, I believe, north end of campus. Of course, FAU was built on an old World War II air base, and so they're having to demolish those old runways. This is ground that hasn't been used before, reroute roads. They're having to put in all new electrical, all new sewage, all new lines. It basically runs from this end of campus. They're running it, if I can do this little mouse, make this work. This right now is surface parking. It's eventually going to be parking lots. Here's where Housing 2 is going to go. So the concept here is that FAU is putting in the infrastructure for this whole parcel, rather than say, well, let's just run the electrical lines and stop, and let's run the electrical lines and stop, or let's run the water lines and stop. It just isn't the way things are done in the facilities development business. If you know what you're going to do, you go ahead and build the capacity for everything you think. That saves money in the long run. So that's, FAU is putting about $5 million from the housing bonds into that common infrastructure. So I wanted to point that out as an unusual feature of the project. The other thing I wanted to look at, just have the committee briefly look at, is the coverages. If you look on page 85, I know this is very small print, but this is, of course, they do have an existing football program, and so we do have some basis for these revenues. We've looked at their consultant report, but you can see we have the existing ticket sales, we have the ticket sales, you can see those increasing at 11-12 upon the opening of the new stadium, but the things that really are a guarantee here are some of these non-operating pledged revenues. They're pledging 5% of their student fees, that's $467,000, that's guaranteed regardless of whether the ticket sales are realized or not. They have these away games and conference revenues. You can see for the historical years, they've been collecting in excess of $2 million for away game and conference guaranteed revenues. They're only pledging $1 million, but they have more revenues. They're pledging less than they have available. So that, to my mind, is a good feature. The bottom line coverage on this is, if you look at the below the line, it's a coverage of 3.4, and so that means they can cover on their available revenues 3 times coverage. So we require in our debt guidelines 1.2 coverage. Those are the features I'd like to point out on the stadium. It is in conformity with the debt guidelines. I think FAU has done a very good job of working with us to put together. This will be only the second stadium this board has considered since we've adopted these debt guidelines. So this is not the first time we've done this, but it's only the second time. So with that, that's all my comments.
Okay, I'd like to ask Chairman Nancy Blosser to come up, and President Saunders, if you have anything you want to add. While Nancy is coming up, let me say that, as I mentioned briefly before, I did go to the site, met Chris there. We went over this in great detail. The athletic director was with us, as were all of the senior officers from FAU. The proposal as it's now presented is not actually that much different from the original one, but it is certainly more detailed. The concerns that were raised about revenue, additional revenue if the operational funds weren't available were certainly answered. This whole Innovation Village, I would encourage anyone who gets the chance to go by and visit that. That is going to be a tremendous asset to the university, and certainly this is a major part of it. I would, however, request that if MJ takes you to the roof of the dorms, ask for some air conditioning, because it was hotter than hell up there. But Nancy was there too, with her stockings and high heels on. So, okay, with that said, would the chairman of the Board of Trustees please speak?
Thank you, Governor Everts, and thank you. Thank you for taking the time to come down and see the project firsthand. We really do appreciate that. We know that it was beneficial for you, but it was beneficial for us to be able to explain it to you firsthand. So thank you for taking that time. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address you today on an issue that the Florida Atlantic University Board of Trustees has studied in depth and has made one of its highest priorities. In 2006, our Board of Trustees approved the university's strategic plan, which includes a vision that FAU be recognized as a university of first choice for excellent and accessible undergraduate and graduate education. The strategic plan includes the objective to improve and expand amenities on our Boca Raton campus that contribute to a traditional university experience. We engaged in a planning process to address such issues as increased on-campus housing, expanded on-campus varsity athletic competitions, and completion of a student fitness wellness complex, and the construction of our first alumni center, as well as focusing on increased student activities. When Chancellor Brogan was FAU's president, he conceived the Innovation Village plan to implement all of these elements in a unified and comprehensive manner. Our new president, Dr. MJ Saunders, has made the completion of Innovation Village one of her top priorities and has fully immersed herself in the details of this project. An on-campus football stadium lies at the very heart of these plans. As has been mentioned, we've already begun the first phase of Innovation Village, the mixed-use residential retail complex that will bring a vibrant population of students and merchants to the section of campus where the stadium will be located. The stadium plan before you today is one that has carefully evolved over the past 4 years and has been fully vetted by our Board of Trustees at each and every step of the process. Thanks to the painstaking and careful research, planning, and negotiating that was carried out by our university attorney, David Keon, Financial Affairs Vice President Dennis Crudell, and Athletics Director Craig Angelos, the FAU Board of Trustees is satisfied that the financial plan being presented to you today is both safe and sound. It has been constructed in a very conservative way, with maximum attention paid to the long-term viability and protection of the university's assets. Our board is fully cognizant of the 30-year commitment. We are confident that there are appropriate contingency plans to address any short-term funding problems, and we are prepared to make potentially tough decisions in the future to assure that we meet our debt obligations. The financial plan pledges no state-appropriated funds, only projected operating revenues of the stadium and the football team, and we have great confidence in these projections because they've been derived from 9 years' experience running our program in an off-campus stadium. By giving this plan our board's unanimous approval, We expressed our confidence in its ability to give FAU the stadium that will seal its future as a university of first choice among students, while not subjecting it to untenable risk. I ask you today, on behalf of the students, alumni, faculty, and staff of FAU, our legendary football coach, Howard Schnellenberger, as well as the Board of Trustees, to give our stadium financing plan your approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you. President Saunders, do you have anything you wish to add? Okay. At this point, I would recognize Governor Tripp. Say, I move.
I can say to this board that this project has had scrutiny for 10 years. And many times it looked like it was coming to fruition, and the board decided that it was too risky or it didn't meet their expectations, and they turned it back. And at the time, they said to Frank and they said to the athletic director, we like the concept, but you're not there yet. And so it has met just a tremendous amount of looking and touching and feeling. And the concept started when I took a visit to UCF, and the then chairman of UCF, the former director of Disney World, told me that it was a good thing to do the Innovation Village, took me around that, and I think theirs has been very successful, and we kind of piloted our project after that. And so, winning football games is a tough thing to do. It'll be a little bit easier in a stadium where it's smaller, and we can force the opposition to throw the ball out of bounds, things of that nature. We're going to make the field a little narrower. So anyway, I would like to move that the resolution be passed.
Governor Tripp moved, Governor Temple seconded. Questions? Please turn your...
2 or 3 questions. I don't know. I don't see it here. My eyes aren't great. My Walgreens specials aren't the best. But the stadium itself, is it just for football, or have you designed it in such a way that the lower level has classrooms, has other areas for use besides just football? That's the first question. Is the stadium going to be more than just, in other words, a football stadium? Second question is that supposing you have a winning team, which I hope you do, is there enough parking there in that area? I don't know exactly where the youngsters play right now. You know, a lot of schools do travel 25 miles or more to go to a stadium. The Orange Bowl was one of them for many years, as you all know, in South Florida. Now they're up at Pro Stadium. I'm not sure that's the best either. So there are 2 questions: parking and what else will be in the stadium. And number 3, you're just about to have the most fabulous medical school. Are you sure that this is where you want to spend your money? I know that there was a lot of approval all the way around. That's a lot of money. I'm just throwing the question out. That's all. Thank you.
Let me respond briefly. The financing for this, and certainly those were very legitimate questions that I looked at in detail, and the financing that is coming for this project does not affect the medical school, nor would it be available to help the medical school, because the repayment source is coming from these facilities and the backup pledges as well. So that was a good question. The question about the parking and the uses we've also asked, but I'll let the university answer those. Or Chris.
Governor Frost, I'd be glad to take the parking question, and I think let the university speak to the other 2, which are, I think, more policy of, was there a higher or better use for it? I think if you look at this map, if you look at the housing 1 is in red and housing phase 2 is in blue, there's those, between those 2 along that same strip of road, they propose eventually to put in some parking decks should the need and demand arise, but also sort of going off the map to the north, there's a tremendous amount of space. It's not necessarily convenient, but that's old runway type space. So I think there'll be more than enough parking. One of the university commitments was that they would only play games on Saturday, and that goes back to the concurrency issue. They wouldn't play night games and put more traffic on the roads. So I think the parking is okay, and I'd be glad to let the university address the other questions.
In addition to that, on the parking, it was pointed out that the location of these lots will also substantially reduce the parking demand generated by the academic buildings, which if you look at the Innovation Village, you see very close.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to imply that you didn't need the stadium. I just meant that they just finished a beautiful stadium at Florida International University, and the entire ground floor of the stadium is used for classrooms by the athletic department, etc. That was what I meant. So I'm just saying that if you are going to do it and we all approve it, is the architect thinking along those lines?
Yeah,
That's all.
there are some other uses built into the facility, including some classrooms, recruiting areas, social event areas, and a limited training facility that supplements our existing training facility for athletes. Thank you. And we hope we can do many things well. And I do believe that having the residential campus particularly speaks to undergraduate commitment to the institution and undergraduate student success. And we're also very, very committed, as you know, to the success of the medical school. Thank you.
Very good questions, Governor Frost. Any, Governor Beard?
I was just interested to see if they've designed it so that it can eventually be expanded.
They have, I believe, an additional 30,000 more seats. This is the advantage you get when you go there. I mean, I'm not trying to shorten the conversation, but I got a tour you wouldn't believe. But no, all of these are very legitimate questions, and I really think that from where we were 10 years ago, there's been a tremendous improvement, and I think this is a facility we all could be proud of. Any further questions, Governor Perez?
Just for the record, Mr. Chairman, the housing bonds are not being pledged in any way to fund the stadium, though. We're just funding the infrastructure around it on the roads.
No,
I just want to be clear.
The funding from the bonds all go to housing. Now,
right.
to be honest and be fair, as it states in the proposal, the Housing Corporation is then loaning, but pledging some of their surplus on hand now to pay for some of these infrastructure issues.
Even the infrastructure, but it's not for the stadium construction or any of those issues.
Not.
This is that functional relationship that we've been talking about.
Functionally, issues have been resolved.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear for the record. We're talking about the stadium a lot, but we're not paying for the stadium with this resolution.
Okay, if there are no further questions, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Gus. I believe the motion passes unanimously. I would like to say to MJ, we're not quite there yet. There's still a vote tomorrow, but looking around, there's more than a majority of the board here. I would like to apply to become your agent. I don't think there's a president in the history of America who in their first year opened a medical school and got a stadium. I mean, that's unreal. Congratulations. Well, I was gonna point out this was approved despite of Chancellor Brogan, not because of. Okay, I am very proud
I
of the
could actually
committee.
see that medical school coming, that's why I laugh.
We actually got through what I thought was a very difficult agenda in record time. Let me just make sure we've done it all. I believe that we have. I thank you, and I especially want to thank the FAU people and the USF people. The Florida Gulf Coast proposal was a little more traditional, so that was much easier to handle. But are there any other comments? If not,
Mr. Chairman, I think that the students and alumni over the next 50 years go to FAU will thank this board for what we just did today.
I agree, Gus. We are adjourned.